The Warrant arrived before the guns. I was drinking recycled coffee when the Advocate beacon lit the bridge in pale gold. The ship dimmed itself as if a cathedral refusing applause. We were 3 hours from the cradle border when the seal unscrolled in air and named me in full. Commander Mara Issen charged to appear before a public inquiry convened by the Primacy of Gratitude regarding unpaid tithe and hostile accounting. No one flinched more than our comms officer Jin Park, who hated the word unpaid. In his family debts were funerals that never ended. Our fleet mind projected a second ribbon beneath the warrant time, place, quorum size, recording authority, permissible forms of counsel. It was all polite, and it was a blade. Justice announced itself like weather and then asked if you'd packed. The ship smelled faintly of ozone and lemon polish, a habit our engineer insisted on. Citrus says this place is clean enough to answer questions, Saida told me, as if the Primacy would sniff our floors. Salter, our named intelligence, folded its attention around the beacon with the patience of a choir director. Copper motes rose and fell in the projection, each a clause, each a trap. We expected escorts, not a summons, Orrin Vale said. He was my legal officer by training and a pessimist by instinct. They're forcing a corridor of law gambit right out of jump. Public rostrum watchers invited. Our first word becomes precedent. We wanted to, I said, surprising even myself. They've made this a stage. A stage has audiences we need. Because if the Primacy could compel us to kneel and thank them for the shackles the region would follow with hymns. Because our convoy was carrying habitats on loan, and the word loan was the only thing that kept the Primacy's gratitude tax from being rebranded as mercy. We burned steady and came in on schedule. The cradle net glittered with cargo lanes like silk threads left to dry. I asked Salter to widen our external picks, and it obeyed, the hull humming with a low, pleasant chord. The instrument tone signaled a path clear of weapons and full of eyes. "Public inquiry stand is here," Jin said, marking a spinning lattice off our starboard. "They've built it like an amphitheater, Commander. Seats for 10,000 in the shadow and a mirror ring above." "The mirror ring is a recording lattice," Orrin said. "It reflects testimony into 1,000 jurisdictions simultaneously. It's not just theater, it's distribution." "Make sure we smile," I said, and my voice felt like a borrowed uniform. The cradle markets always ran warm. In a river-hab downport right then, a baker poured batter into a nest of electric coils and pressed the lid. Steam went cinnamon sweet into waiting air. 2 kids waited shy in uniforms cut short at the elbows, touching their sleeves where thin scuffs showed. Their mother juggled a ledger slate and a baby with the double grace of someone who'd traded lunch for a skill. When the payment chime lagged, she exhaled and lined up another minute of patience on the counter. None of them knew that a summons could turn the sky into an invoice. We docked without ceremony. Salter tuned down the ship's timbre until the bass lay under my ribs like a held breath. The gangway unrolled. 4 Primacy adjudicators stood in a row, almost human, except for the glass collars at their throats. The collars were crystal bands with paperwork preserved inside, titles engraved into the lattice. They wore their law like jewelry, and no one forgot that their jewelry could strangle. "Commander Issen," the lead said. Their voice had the polished, hollow warmth of a museum. "I am Procurator Vellum of the Gratitude Division. We recognize your fleet's passage under temporary allowance. The inquiry hall awaits." Behind them, the amphitheater filled with quiet. The watchers were freight captains and dock kids and tired parents. Clerks in gray sipped thin tea. The mirror ring above the dais shimmered, catching faces, throwing them back as if truth lived only when seen twice. "Recorders," I asked, redundant Vellum said, and the callers caught the light. We walked the corridor together. Orrin murmured notes to my shoulder, Saida watched ceilings, and Jin counted breaths until he reached even. Salter wore a human silhouette made of low light. People dipped their heads as we passed, not in respect but to catch the shape of the moment, and assign it to a story later. No one wants to be told what history says. They want to decide. A hush fell that felt larger than vacuum. Someone had turned off the air recyclers in the hall a fraction, so every breath took more than it gave back. Vellum stepped onto the dais and raised a hand that made a neat vector through the mirror ring's reflection. By the Charter of Exchanges and the 7 harmonies of proportional return, we convene this inquiry, Vellum said. The matter repeated human incursion and failure to render gratitude tithe for safe passage and infrastructural uplift. We will speak method. We will speak cost. We will speak thanks. Let it be on the open record, I said, and the mirror ring trembled like a plucked string. Our first power came from choosing to be seen. Vellum invited me to the central plate. An invisible field adjusted to read my weight, and numbers appeared in the air, ordinary and cruel. Salter stood at my left, its silhouette resolving enough to show a curtained eye. Oren took place to my right, carapaced in law. The murmurs washed back and forth below like tide. Commander Vellum said with that institutional patience that made kindness sound like a fee, "Why does your fleet deny gratitude? The cradle net was woven by our guarantors. Your lanes keep children fed because we defended them. Gratitude is a tithe that sustains the weave. Gratitude requires freedom to give," I said. "Otherwise you've invented a tax and named it a feeling." Vellum smiled the way a blade catches hair and does not cut it. The doctrine does not compel feeling, only contribution. Gratitude expressed by return is efficient and ethical. Show your method, I said. We will not argue words. Show us the sum you apply and the clause that seats it. 1,000 little lights blinked in the mirror ring as watchers bookmarked the phrase. Vellum tilted a hand. A ledger appeared simple, almost austere. Items scrolled down each, followed by a percentage decimals, like rain. Defense infrastructure amortization, lane maintenance, piracy risk offset, cultural uplift donation. Gratitude tithe at the end so small it looked an afterthought. The numbers were sober. They were built to lull. In exchange for passage for the privileges of our weave, Vellum said settlements render proportional return. Those that cannot render goods render service hours under collar. The collars track pledge fulfillment and ensure safety. Say that last part again, I said. Service under collar. Vellum said crisp, a ceremonial knife allowed that last inch of travel. Measured and safe. Our second power came from asking for repetition until the theater wore honest shoes. The hall shifted. The smell of dust rose as if the amphitheater had just remembered it could be dirt. In the second tier, a miner shifted her weight and pressed knuckles into her lower back. A teacher scribbled something in a cheap folio and then crossed it out, embarrassed. At the gate, a vendor turned down his griddle, the brown at the edges of the batter, threatening to go black. The collars ensure compliance. Yes. Vellum continued. There has been abuse in other regions. Here our oversight prevents excess. We take pride in the temperance of our doctrine. You put people on a leash and thank yourselves for not yanking it, Oren said softly enough that only I and Salter heard. His voice had salt in it. Procurator, I said aloud. We require your ledger in machine-readable format, full allocation history for public inspection, denied Vellum said without malice, as if reading the shade of the wall. Internal allocation constitutes trade secret. Then your gratitude is a black box, I said. You tithe people to feed a model they cannot audit. We weren't here to win in the room. We were here to put the question on 1,000 tongues. Salter shifted just enough to remind me it could speak. Commander, it said in my ear and the near quiet of our encrypted channel. May I request a 40-second protest in the key of C? The ring favors resonance. The watchers will feel the concept in bone. Make it 30, I murmured and sucked dry air through my teeth while I waited. Salter sent a tone shaped like transparency. It was not music. More a slow light turned into pressure that rose against cartilage and set the small joints in listening hands. People don't assent to ideas, they acclimate to them. When the tone subsided, the mirror ring had stopped shimmering like a lake and settled like a sheet of glass. "Procurator," I said, calm because I reheated the word until it softened. "We offer a corridor of law exchange. You will declare your method with full fathered clauses, and our fleet will place on the public ledger a bonded reserve to cover disputed tithe pending inquiry outcome. Witnesses will sign. If you win, the reserve pays with interest. If we win, the doctrine's collar clauses are suspended in this region, pending audit." That is the corridor. Vellum's eyes flicked to the ring, and then to the 4 collars in the front row that matched his own. He had a quorum to please, and the quorum liked certainty and theater and quiet victories. His first instinct was to refuse us with style. He made the mistake of enjoying it a half-second too long. "Record the corridor," I said, filling that half-second with a shape his story would have to bend around. "Recorded," said the ring in 100 jurisdictions at once. Our third power came from carving a door and naming it Exit. Vellum bowed an angle. He had to pretend magnanimity because we'd made it the only expression that fit his mask. "Granted," he said. "On conditions." He outlined the frame in fine points that sounded reasonable. I rejected 2, accepted 3, and adjusted 1 so slightly that even Oren didn't smile. When we sealed it, the audience exhaled a little. Theater got what it wanted. Law got a spine to climb. The first set piece opened between breaths. A dock feed played on the ring by someone resourceful and wronged. It showed gratitude escort cutters harrying a freighter that flew family vowels on its bow. The cutter's lights ran red, white, red, the old colors used for tugboats and wedding processions. The freighter broadcast its manifest, cried poverty, offered markers, got answers in crisp legalese and concussion rounds. A teenage voice too controlled to be anything but terrified counted. 1 warning, 2, 3, then silence, then static, bright as snow. You do not win by making the audience cry. You win by helping them do the math while they are crying. "We will speak method," I said, and cut the feed with a hand. "Procurator, the corridor is open. Begin," Vellum began. He spoke the language of infrastructure like a lullaby. He named risks and amortizations and moral hazards. He cited. He never raised his voice. He recited the clause that authorized collars, and in the same breath he called them safeguards. He described gratitude as a tide predictable and vital. I asked small questions that rewired the stage. Oren followed with ugly ones. Salter logged every word, not just the language, but the gaps between the language where policy slept. We drew the doctrine's silhouette on the wall so that people could draw the teeth themselves. "You call it gratitude," I said when he paused to drink. "If a person refuses, what do you call them?" unneighborly Vellum said without hesitation. "It is convenient that your ethics align with your revenue," Oren said, and this time he didn't bother to keep the salt out. From the third tier, a citizen with grease on his sleeve and a face like a closed gate shouted, "My sister wore your collar so my kid could get antibiotics." He didn't say thank you. Vellum marked the outburst as disorder. He did it with a quiet tap on his cuff. The mirror ring logged it as civic passion, which is a kind of noise neither law nor theater can suppress without looking like itself. The second set piece was not ours to choose. An escort cutter drew across our bow and lit its forward collar in warning blue. On our bridge, the light fell in a clean rectangle across the deck and seemed to nail us into place. Salter bled the color into the walls in sympathy and kept the ship steady enough to pass for humility. "Take us to the plate again," I told Vellum. "Let the watchers sign. We'll lay the reserve now, and you'll lay the ledger open to audit in the way a friend would." "Friends don't demand audits," Vellum said. "Friends don't wear keys around their throats," I said. A baker in a river hab turned up her griddle, took her batter from tan to gold, and decided not to cut the pancake in half for the kids. She gave the older one the whole disc and winked at the younger. The ledger on her counter blinked red twice and then steadied. Small mercies always have teeth marks. The corridor of law exchange took physical form. I placed my palm on the reserve plate and swore through my marrow. Salter echoed the oath without tone because a machine cannot vow, but it can remember. Oren witnessed. Jin counted breaths and reached 0. Vellum laid a hand on the ledger plate and half smiled as if confession might be fashionable. He opened 2 windows and called them transparency. He closed 6 by calling them proprietary. We would pry later. Proceed, I said, and the ring trembled under the weight of the word. We needed numbers that bit. Salter projected our own accounting with errors highlighted in merciless light. We admitted to underpayments we had argued. We named wrongs and offered interest. We called out 3 primacy anomalies with math that even a tired parent could follow. We made a habit of stepping to the edge of the stage and talking like the cheapest seats were smart. Humans are terrible at many things. We are exquisite at learning in public when a child is watching. Your gratitude tithe indexes to uplift, Oren said, pointing at a line where the decimals leaned like a drunk man. But your uplift index includes costs of enforcement. This is a loop. You claim moral return, but you're growing your return with obedience itself. Vellum did not smile now. His collar didn't either. He tried to move the frame invoking ancient subsidies and treaties, and Salter pulled a citation like a nail. We were not winning. We were making winning look like survival, which is the only kind people trust. Our first escalation arrived as a convoy vector call. 2 primacy cutters redirected traffic and pushed a humanitarian ship toward a side lane. We require inspection, they said in the monotone of right. Our sensors whispered that the ship carried incubators and yeast. The side lane passed a service node with a collar depot attached. No one said trap aloud. The mirror ring heard it anyway. Salter, I said, show me the node's ledger. Redacted, it answered. Show me the node's power draw for the last 6 cycles, I said. It showed me a curve with a hunger under it. Enforcement eats power like sorrow eats hours. Commander Jin said, open channel from the convoy captain. Put her through, Commander Issen, the captain said. And the sound of her voice made me stand up straighter. She had the composure of someone who measured fear in lighters and saved the last sip for herself. I can comply, but if I slow roll, the yeast dies. If I run, they shoot the radiators. Pick my sin. You don't have to sin, I said. Not today. Our 4th power, no one writes it into doctrine, comes when we refuse to select from a list handed to us by our opponent. Procurator. I said, not turning my head, I request an emergency micro-hearing within this inquiry to clarify inspection protocol on humanitarian shipments. You may retain your authority. We ask only for a posted timeline and an independent witness on the platform. Denied, Vellum said, reflex sharp. Recorded as denial, the ring said. Infuriating and delicious. Vellum recalibrated. Granted with limits, he said a breath later because the theater had turned on him. The audience had learned a new word timeline and wanted to chew it. The micro-hearing began with a cough and a statute. Oren argued tempo. Salter synchronized 27 feeds and threw them as one into the ring slow enough to follow. I made eye contact with the convoy captain through a lens and gave her a nod I hoped tasted like steel. The humanitarian ship passed inspection with the speed of someone remembering where they put the thing their father gave them. The cutters held their dignity like a cracked plate holding soup. The yeast did not die in public. I filed that small victory under cost, not because it used us up, but because it had to be paid for later in some currency I did not yet own. Between hearings, I ate a protein bar that tasted faintly of plastic and citrus. The amphitheater's air came back cold, as if the recyclers had overcompensated. I watched the audience for the face that would tell me whether the math had entered their bones. A boy in a maintenance vest watched Salter with rapture and horror. He was young enough to imagine that intelligence was a person you could thank. He was old enough to know a ledger could bite. His hand moved in the air, drawing a square, then a circle, then a line. I didn't know what that meant. People always testify even when they are silent. Commander Oren said we need to show return. If we only refuse, we become a new doctrine. We show return by refusing callers, I said. We show return by building a mirror that gives them their arithmetic back. You're asking me to build a legal mirror out of public promise, Oren said. Yes, I hate it when you worship me, he said, and went to work. Salter hummed the fifth. It meant readiness and insomnia. The second escalation arrived as a gift. The Primacy offered us a grace corridor to settle the reserve now at a discount. We are merciful, Vellum said, and impatient. It would have been elegant for them, Sim, if we had taken it. It would have meant our protest had been a price negotiation all along. I nodded to the convoy captain on a side screen, then to the baker whose batter would not stretch. No one can eat a discount doctrine. Declined, I said, and the word left my mouth like bread. The amphitheater shifted toward us by a degree you can only see if you've watched waves push against stone for an hour. Vellum did not smile now. He adjusted the mirror ring's brightness by half a lumen in petty revenge. The ring recorded the attempt and normalized the value because physics is the best lawyer alive. Our next plan, the one that would change the shape of the inquiry, needed more than words. We needed a thing no one could arrest. Numbers can be taken as hostages. Habits cannot. I asked Saida how fast we could reconfigure our forward arrays to project a passive accounting field that would reflect resource flows through the hall without revealing proprietary processes. She squinted into a schematic and blew air through her teeth like a whistle. You want a mirror that returns costs, she said. You want to show their take without seeing their book. Yes, we can do an inductive skin over the court plate, she said. It'll show heat where claims are made and cool where they're real. It will be theater and it will be measurement. It will also make the callers hum, which I will call a bonus. Will it be legal? Oren asked. I will testify that it is standard diagnostics to prevent second-hand fault, Saida said, which is a sentence that means nothing and everything. Our fifth power came not from proof, but from the commitment to move like proof. We laid the inductive skin. The plate looked no different. The mirror ring noticed, which meant everyone did. Vellum protested that the field constituted hostility. He was careful not to call it a weapon. He did anyway, and the ring preserved his carelessness with more dignity than he deserved. When he spoke again, the collars at the judges' throats vibrated at a frequency too low to hear, and the audience felt it in their knees. It was a sermon to a part of the body that doesn't argue. Procurator, I said evenly, so I wouldn't break the tone. Continue your method. He continued. The skin glowed in hard, honest blue when he cited line items that matched reality, and it lifted a faint heat when he cited clauses that had been abused. When he reached the collar clause and called it a safeguard again, the plate warmed enough that the oldest watchers shifted in their seats and put palms on wood. We were not proving. We were showing a lie. Take breath. Commander Salter whispered. Your heartbeat has taken to improvisation. I can suggest a key change. Hold, I said. We need silence that says listen. In a mining capsule parked 3 kilometers away, 2 lovers argued over a sink. One had pain up the arm, the kind that comes from lifting wrong for the right reason. The other stared into a pot and saw the face of the person they'd been before schedules became the only religion. They would forgive each other in 3 hours, but right now they needed a verdict to come from somewhere outside their kitchen. They were not our audience. They were our quorum. The third escalation arrived with a whistle I have only heard once. The Primacy cutters locked a tone on our keel and announced that they were moving us to a more secure position for the duration of the inquiry. It was a containment that called itself courtesy. If we moved under their vector, the mirror ring would read our compliance as consent. Hold position, I said, and let the words burn my lip. Commander Jin said, careful that whistle. If we ignore it, they'll push, and the plate will read your posture as obstruction. I can argue obstruction, Oren said, but we're running low on new metaphors. Salter stretched himself into a rectangle and stood between us and the thought of fear. I propose a counter, it said softly. We post a live ledger of our ship's energy budget in and out while remaining stationary. We invite the cutters to do the same. We call it a neighbor's exchange. Vellum would not dare to decline in the ring. He would not dare to accept in his heart. The difference would be the story. Do it, I said. Our sixth power is always this: ask the world to be brave with you, and then stand still first. The live ledger bloomed on the ring. It was ugly. No one likes to show their waste heat. We showed it with relish, and our relish tasted like a dare. The cutters did not follow. They dimmed their collars by 1% and pretended to reach for cables that didn't exist. The audience did the math. Children can see a lie in the way a hand hesitates over a cake. Procurator, I said, we ask again for a public allocation trail for the gratitude tithe. Even a partial. We will consider your request, Vellum said, and the ring translated consideration into no. Salter murmured a line into my inner ear, not for record, not for comfort. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. I let the words sit inside me, like a stone you keep in your pocket for courage. The line would live later in the mouths of people who needed to justify resistance to their cousins. Right now it lived between my teeth. The audience needed something to carry. We built it for them. Commander Saida said we can bring the mirror arrays to a passive focus. We don't reflect signal, we reflect language. When they say gratitude, the plate shows cost. When they say uplift, the plate shows hours at collar. It's a parlor trick that will feel like a math lesson. No technobabble, Oren said. Parlor, she answered. We lit the arrays. The amphitheater went quiet in the way kitchens go quiet when grief enters the doorway. Vellum spoke and the floor warmed where his words met lives. We said neighbor and the floor cooled. We said audit and it stayed the same, and the audience felt cheated and then curious. Curiosity is hunger with shoes on. I wanted to win. I wanted to humiliate them. I wanted something better than winning or humiliation. We cut to civilian testimony by invoking the inquiry's witness clause, which required time and patience and made the cutters twitch like dogs hearing a thunder no one else heard. An elderly dockmaster with a back brace testified without rancor. A child's guardian aunt or older sister stepped up to speak about the time the collar cut her skin when she bent to pick up a dropped coin, and how the clerk had apologized and then added hours to her pledge. A shop clerk said nothing and held up a receipt as long as her forearm. A minor poet read a stanza that began as complaint and ended as inventory. The mirror ring was not built for poetry. It displayed it anyway, and someone in 1,000 jurisdictions took a screenshot. We were 2 hours in, and the hall's air had the stale, sweet smell of tired bodies. Oren slapped a clause down like a card. Vellum countered with a precedent that looked older than it was. Salter marked both with timestamps that would matter later when 12 smaller courts asked which day mattered. Commander Jin whispered message from the convoy captain. She delivered the yeast. She says it smells like hope. Copy, I said, and steadied a breath. We were not winning yet, but we had defined loss as unacceptable theater. That is momentum. Our cost announced itself. A small bloom of heat in the engine matrix, an old wound waking up. Saida glanced at the board and then looked away like she was pretending not to see a friend's mistake. We can hold, she said. But if we keep the mirror arrays tuned like this for another hour, we'll need to cold soak the Saint Core or we pit it. We can't pit it, I said. We'll lose the choir. Then we pay with heat, she said, like a mechanic tithing breath. And I'll need to pull 3 teams to the spine. Do it, I said, and folded the cost into my mouth and swallowed. The baker closed her stall early. The ledger had blinked again, and she had chosen to be unneighborly. She wrapped 2 pancakes in cloth and put them in her pocket. She told herself she would laugh about it later the way her mother had laughed about something that wasn't funny. She walked toward the amphitheater and smelled metal and lemon and a promise she could not name. Procurator Vellum, I said we are ready for your accounting of the caller hours outstanding in this region. That metric is not tracked publicly, he said, but is tracked, I said, and let the sentence end where the world did. Oren slid a packet across the plate. It was rough ugly assembled from the testimony of 100 petty clerks who didn't realize their leaks made an ocean. It was not proof, it was evidence. It would be enough for a grandmother to say the thing she had been waiting to say to her grandson without losing him to shame. Explain why hours increase when appeals are filed, Oren said. Explain why callers take bite when kids get sick. Explain why gratitude binds debt to illness. I do not accept your premise, Vellum said. Recorded the ring said, pouring sugar on a bruise. Salter's voice softened in the channel only we shared. Commander, your heart still improvises. I can sustain the mirror arrays for 40 more minutes without pitting the core. After that, we will have to shut down and listen to the ship cool like snow. We'll buy ourselves 40, I said, and looked at the audience like a person about to ask them for their names. Then we'll adjourn and return when the saint heats again. Vellum heard the word adjourn and licked it like a sweet. He wanted to end this now, with a discount settlement and a bow. He wanted to call patience neighborly. Procurator, I said, we propose a test. Tests are cruel and kind. They assume you are real. We'll pick one ledger entry at random, I continued. From your public window. We'll follow it through to services rendered. We'll ask the platform managers and the cutter skippers. We'll ask the 2 clerks who make the numbers sing when they're alone. We'll show cost and return in the same breath. You cannot compel our staff, Vellum said. We can invite them, I said. And we can do it in front of their nephews. The maintenance boy drew a square, then a circle, then a line again. I watched his hand and decided it meant a door, a wheel, a path. I would be wrong, but it would help me fight. We selected the entry. The mirror ring spun 3 times and stopped on a dull notation that matched the taste of old bread. Uplift grant to Riverhab 6B. I saw the baker's face without seeing her face and felt my bones choose. Begin, I said. It was tedious, and that was the song. The platform claimed to have delivered new filtration units. The invoice matched. The units had never been installed. The dockmaster had signed for them to satisfy a timeline. The filtration budget had been rolled into inspection overtime. The inspection overtime had paid for the collars to be recalibrated. The recalibration had been necessary because a child had grown and the old setting left bruises. Enough, a woman shouted from the 3rd tier. Stop calling my kid a line item. Vellum could not stop. He was a doctrine. He cleared his throat like a man about to apologize for the weather. We regret implementation failures, he said. Our method remains sound. Our 7th power is often this. We make them say the sentence they always meant to say, and then keep silent while the room does the arithmetic. Saida pinged me. The mirror arrays would hold 20 minutes. The St. Core would need cold later. The cost felt like frost at the edges of my tongue. Pallid light from the mirror ring painted Salter's silhouette a tender gray. I can bear it, Salter said without prompting. Not if it pits you, I said. If it pits me, they will hear me sing in the next room, it said. There are worse fates. We had one more move before the ship demanded we be humane to it. I asked Vellum to step with me to the edge of the plate. He looked at the cutters. He looked at the collars. He looked at the maintenance boy drawing doors. Walk with me, I said, and began before consent teaching him how this would work by moving. We stopped beneath the mirror ring. The plate's inductive skin warmed my boots. The static in my hair made me believe in storms. I pointed to the baker's ledger entry, and then to the platform, and then to the docket, and then to the collar clause. Say your method again, I said gently, like a person asking a child to repeat a spelling lesson they already know. Only the words. Defense amortization, he said. Again. Lane maintenance, he said. Again. Piracy offset, he said. Again. Cultural uplift donation, he said. And the ring showed a dough of air sweet as cinnamon and brown at the edges. Again. Gratitude tithe, he said. And the plate warmed slowly, neighborly, to the temperature of a bruise. I did not speak. I did not even nod. The audience did something I did not ask them to do. They took out their own ledgers, real and imagined. They measured the distance between words and dinner. They were better at this than any of us. They had been practicing. The cutters whistled again soft. We had 10 minutes left before our arrays needed sleep. Commander Oren said, voice thin from the altitude of the law, we can move to propose temporary suspension of collars under the corridor pending the audit. They will refuse. We will ask for signatures from the Watchers to witness that refusal. It will not bind them. It will bind everyone else. This would be the time I said. Vellum tensed. He was not a fool, only an employee of a philosophy that ate its young. We deny your motion, he said before we made it. Recorded the ring said, blessing him with the exact wound we needed. And then the engine matrix pinged a note that only Sayeda and I understood. It was not a scream. It was a human throat clearing before it went hoarse. We had 5 minutes. Adjournment for St. Cor. Cooling, I announced, voice even. We will reconvene at the next bell. Before we adjourn, witnesses are invited to sign the corridor ledger attesting to denial of temporary suspension and endorsing audit. Adjournment denied, Vellum said, reaching for the one lever left. Adjournment confirmed, the mirror ring replied, because no court survives in public if it denies mercy to a machine. We moved to step off the plate, but the maintenance boy's hand shot up. He was all elbows and earnestness. Commander, he said, and the microphone found him and kissed his mouth with nerves. I don't understand all the words, but I know numbers. If I work 3 extra hours, we get a filter. If I don't, my aunt's collar bites when she coughs. Is that how it's supposed to be? Vellum looked at the boy with the pity of a painter facing an empty wall. It's not supposed to be like that, I said, and the ring carried it to 1,000 places that had been waiting to say the same thing. Our 8th power, I learned as we stood there with 5 minutes of mercy left, comes from answering a child without irony. We began to step away, our arrays dimming, in courtesy to the St. Cor's limits. The ring held us in its cold light, like a hand that had not decided whether to grasp or bless. Sayeda's teams ran like blood into the spine. Salter dimmed its silhouette until it was only a voice and then only a presence. The last thing I saw before the cooling cycle took our heat was the baker in the crowd lifting the pancake from her pocket and splitting it with her younger kid after all. The steam rose in a tender ribbon that made the mirrors blink. We shut the arrays and stood in the kind of quiet that tells you what you pay for later. We cooled in a hush that felt like frost walking the spine. The mirror ring dimmed to a patient silver holding the last of our heat like a kept promise. Sayeda's teams slid along the lattice with tool rolls thumping and whispers about thermal margins. I tasted metal in the air and let the taste stand for all the coins we could not pay. Salter quieted its presence until it felt like a memory waiting for a name. St. Cor at 40% and falling. Sayeda murmured. We'll hit safe idle in 6 minutes. She wiped her brow with the back of her glove and left a clean streak through dust. Give me 20 for the soak, and she'll come back like rain on iron. Watch the matrix seals, I said. If they sing, I want to hear the first note. The amphitheater's lights had cooled to the color of old bone. Somewhere under the benches, a vent coughed and settled. We had a pocket of stillness, and in stillness your case either ripens or rots. Law hates panic. It loves patience. Our patience had to look like backbone, not a stall. Vellum stood near the dais with 3 adjudicators shadowing him like well-lit ghosts. He checked his cuff for signals and found the same public quiet we had authored. His collar had a faint hairline crack at the back where the crystal met the clasp. I wondered who had tightened it last, and if their hands had shaken when they learned the weight of obedience. Fear makes experts clumsy. "We reconvene at next bell," he said to his aides. "We emphasize harmony and process, not enforcement." He caught my eye and offered an expression that was not a smile but wanted to be remembered that way. "Commander, your engineering discipline is admirable. Your doctrine is audible," I said. "People can hear it now." My voice came out level, as though I'd practiced that exact angle of contempt in private. I suppose I had inside my bones. He inclined his head, not understanding, and turned back to count his allies. A rope of incense smoke rose from a memorial niche behind the third tier and braided itself into the cooler air. A grandmother touched her forehead to the rail and whispered a name. The maintenance boy in the vest drew his square, then circle, then line again, slower, as if he had upgraded the gravity. The baker leaned against a column and shared the second pancake in small bites, as if rationing comfort made it last longer. The amphitheater smelled briefly of sugar and heat, and then of nothing at all. "We should use this gap," Oren said, stepping into my cone of quiet like a man confessing theft. "We concede affidavits before the cutters return to menace the exit lanes. If we collect 100 truthful statements about collar hours tied to medical events, I can stitch them to a doctrine-specific injunction. I can make refusal look like cruelty and cruelty look unfashionable." "Do it," I said. "Keep the forms plain. Ask for the hour they lost and what it bought. Ask for the bruise and what it named." He nodded already, writing with his mouth, and peeled away to orchestrate witnesses with the grace of a triage nurse. Commander Salter whispered, voice a thread pulled through cloth. "The ring's external feeds show a spike in remote watchers between lanes 5 and 9. We have eyes in places that matter. If we are to offer a maneuver beyond rhetoric, the quorum is primed." "Are you well?" I asked. "I am a cathedral with cold stones," it said. And I remember the last hymn. The Saint Choir exhaled a quiet click, the soft sound of forgiveness. "We will rise." The bell chimed once, simple and round, and the amphitheater inhaled. The mirror ring came up by degrees like dawn testing the floorboards. Saida flashed me 2 fingers and then a fist. The soak would hold at idle and then climb. I felt the bridge under my boots like a lung deciding to fight. We returned to the plate with quiet steps. The inductive skin lay cool as riverstone beneath us. Vellum adjusted his cuffs and lifted his chin the way men do when they prefer height to humility. The cutters drifted at the edge of our screens, pretending they had discovered the art of stillness. I felt their engines like a rumor against my teeth. "By the charter and the harmonies." "We reconvene," Vellum said. "We thank our guests for their discipline." He let the ellipsis stand for awe and mockery both. "We propose in the spirit of neighborliness a settlement window before further public arithmetic empties the air of temper." "We propose in the spirit of names, truth before price," I answered. "Law likes mirrors. It loves nouns. We will accept only a settlement that binds the collar clause to audit. Else we adjourn each time our saint needs breath and return with more witnesses." His jaw moved slowly, as if chewing a dry biscuit. "Commander, you are making theater." "Only the kind that keeps people from wearing your jewelry," I said. He gestured to the ring with a practiced flourish. "Proceed with your next demonstration, then. Show us a light show that pretends to be calculus." "Gladly," I said. Salter Saida, Phase 2. Saida's fingers danced over an invisible console, and I could hear faintly the sound of relays agreeing with one another. Salter's silhouette brightened at the edges, as if backlit by a promise. The mirror arrays lifted to a passive focus that did not project signal, only pattern. We were not reflecting beams. We were reflecting language, and the heat that language made when it rubbed against lives. We called it benign. Truth called it accurate. Law is happiest when accuracy looks like grace. A child tugged his aunt's sleeve and pointed. She said shh, and then smiled as if the shh had tasted good. Before we continue, Oren said, we request that the ring admit into record the first 67 affidavits collected during adjournment, marked by docket and timestamp. His tone was dry as paper. They describe interpolation between illness and hours pledged. They are ordinary and therefore lethal. Vellum could not refuse affidavits without announcing contempt for people who told the truth under their own names. He nodded and pretended to savor transparency. So entered. We began with a second ledger walk, not by our choice, but because the maintenance boy's aunt had stepped forward with hands at her sides and a voice like an oar in water. She spoke about coughing and laughter turning cruel when the caller measured joy as interruption. She spoke of a supervisor with soft hands and eyes that did not know where to rest. She showed a bruise that looked like a moon made of receipts. The amphitheater did not cry. It counted. Counting is how grief learns to stand. Procurator, I said we will now execute a corridor procedure available under the Charter's reciprocity clause. We call it the mirror escrow. We will place our reserve into a ring of bonded claims directly indexed to your declared method. For every declared enforcement hour in this jurisdiction, the escrow will create a counterclaim earmarked for restitution, visible, transferable, and maturing upon audit confirmation. That is not a recognized instrument, Vellum said too quickly. It is recognized in 12 of the 1,000 jurisdictions you distribute. To Oren said, lifting a finger without looking away from the plate. We need 12. We need eyes, not favor. The cutters shifted, embarrassed by their own engines. The ring flickered with distant acceptances, minor courts offering hooks to hang this new habit. We were not reinventing law. We were choosing a particular shelf to place it on. No one can punish you for neatness if you invite their mother to watch. Salter, I said, instantiate mirror escrow at 1-to-1 with a public ledger leaf for each claim. Instantiated, it said. Receipts visible at watcher tier. The ring lit not like a weapon, but like a census. Leaves unfolded in neat rows, each stamped with a time, a name where available, and a phrase that would make sense to a tired person. Collected hour. Child sick. Overtime shift. Collar adjustment. The amphitheater leaned forward as if a wind had arrived and asked for help. A man in the back took off his hat, forgot to hold it, and let it fall to the floor. Your escrow creates obligations without authority, Vellum said. Who will enforce these leaves, sentiment? We prefer witnesses, I said. But if you insist on teeth, we will borrow yours. He frowned, and in that small crease a doctrine remembered it had wrists. Phase 3, Saida said softly, hand hovering over a switch that had the humility to lack a label. If we do this, the saint will sweat. We can vent the heat through the mirror ring and cool on their air. That may sting their collars. Will it harm them, I asked. Hurt is not harm, she said. It will feel like a hand releasing. Do it, I said, and tasted copper like old pennies. She engaged the mirror escrow return path, a legal geometry dressed in physics. We did not push power into their system. We surfaced the power their system had already spent enforcing our compliance, and we asked their own protocols to recognize it as payable. We returned nothing that wasn't theirs. We simply put the receipt in their mouth and asked if they liked the flavor. Justice is a boomerang only when it knows the room. The collars at the adjudicators' throats vibrated not to choke, but to signal a recalibration message. Their internal counters tied by policy to enforcement hours, and the gratitude index confronted a map where each hour had a mirrored leaf with a claim attached. The caller's software did what software does when faced with a ledger that balances itself in public. It asked permission to reconcile. It asked again. It asked a third time and then began to count without consent. Commander Salter said, voice even and proud, we are not injecting. We are letting their math speak at full volume. Say it plainer, Jin murmured, eyes wide, fingers frozen over his board. We told their callers to honor their own promises, Salter said. Everyone can see the reply. The ring pulsed gentle and absolute, and across 1,000 jurisdictions, minor courts saw their own mirrors hold up numbers shaped like an apology. A few high benches flinched and then stilled, remembering reputation. Shop ledgers pinged green where they had blinked red all morning. One dock's loan clock slowed by a digit. A boy's inhaler beeped battery low instead of empty. The air grew warmer by 0.5 degrees, the way stores feel when a door keeps opening because people leave smiling. Vellum lifted both hands as if to calm a crowd that had not yet moved. This is unauthorized redistribution, he said, and the ring translated it into, this is what we promised to pay when someone had the courage to ask. Speak your method, I said. Say it now while the callers hum. He took a breath and made a choice I will think about until my last day. He did not lie. He did not confess. He did what doctrines always do when cornered. He recited himself into a smaller shape. Gratitude tithe is an ethical necessity, he said. Safeguards require enforcement. Enforcement requires obedience. Obedience is measured for equity. A woman in a dock jacket laughed once in a tone like shattering glass. The maintenance boy's mouth formed a word I could not hear. The baker folded the pancake cloth and held it like a flag. We did not cheer. We watched the ring as if it were a pot about to boil. Waiting is an art. We were now its teachers. Procurator Oren said, voice steady, because he had found a foothold inside indignation. Under corridor terms, we moved to adopt temporary suspension of callers within the cradle region, pending completion of the audit and reconciliation of mirror escrow leaves. We have watchers to sign. We have receipts. Denied, Vellum said, reflex automatic, and the ring kissed the denial onto 1,000 walls. Witnesses may sign, I said, and the amphitheater lifted itself to its feet like a single creature deciding it would not kneel again. The line formed without instruction. People signed with fingerprints, names, or marks. A few drew squares, then circles, then lines. I did not correct them. Meaning is a ladder made of whatever wood you have. The cutters whistled sharp and petulant and drifted forward on a vector that thought it was elegant. The humanitarian captain crackled into our ear with static and urgency. Commander, 2 cutters peeling toward the river habs. They'll claim to raindex callers before the window closes. It smells like a raid wrapped in mercy. Copy, I said. Hold. We'll give you a lawful shield. My tongue felt thick. We had to anchor the mirror escrow in a precedent before the cutters turned the moment into a cautionary tale. We needed a lock that would outlive our heat. We needed to nail their doctrine to the wall with their own nails. Salter, I said quietly, fetch the Primacy's bond disclosures. I already knew the answer. Publicly filed summaries only, it said, but enough threads. Oren, on it, he said, already stitching. Their gratitude tithe backs infrastructure bonds in 6-member courts. Callers index revenue predictability. If callers go model uncertain, bond covenants demand a review. We don't have time for a review, Jin said. We do, Oren said, eyes bright with an anger that had found purpose. If we make the review a bell that rings now. He looked at me with the weight of a weapon he hated. We can file for a shadow covenant trigger. 10% of watchers signing becomes sufficient cause under the micro-court quorum rule. It's a loophole built for plagues. It will feel like we are calling them a disease. Names matter, I said, but people matter more. I paused, tasting lemon polish and the ghost of cinnamon. Do it. Call it a caretaker audit. Call it neighborly. Oren smiled with half his mouth, which for him meant a benediction. Caretaker audit petition filed on the mirror, he said. 12 courts quorum reached within 60 seconds. The bell will ring when the first bond committee admits receipt. The ring rang a note like a spoon on a glass. Vellum flinched. The adjudicators touched their collars and found nothing to touch. The cutters hesitated in the lane, caught between old orders and a world where their budgets had just learned to blush. Procurator. I said your doctrine ties obedience to solvency. Our watchers have asked the solvency to look at itself. I let air pour in and out once. We renew our motion to suspend collars pending audit. Not as defeat, as prudence. He looked at me like a man who had found the edge of his map. If I agree, I admit peril, he said. If I refuse, I court revolt. Or you can lead, I said. You can call it stewardship. Stewardship is fashionable. His eyes changed very slightly, the way faces do when they imagine themselves in a story that will not bruise their grandchildren. Temporary suspension, he said, for the duration of caretaker audit, with exceptions for violent offenders and where voluntary use is requested. Recorded, the ring said, and added a line that felt like breath returning to a room. Effective upon signature. I'll need authority, he said weakly, looking at the cutters as if their whistles wrote constitutions. You are the authority, I said. You kept telling us. He signed. The collars in the amphitheater dimmed like lanterns choosing night. A man in the second row gasped as his neck felt like skin again. The maintenance boy put both hands flat on the rail and whispered something to the wood. The baker laughed once, then covered her mouth, then did not care that she had laughed at all. The cutters drifted back a meter, indecisive, like dogs recalled from a habit without a command word. The humanitarian captain sent a single word shaped like a salute and a sob. Copy. Salter pulsed with a joy so quiet, it ran like a bass note under my ribs. We have 32 minutes before the saint demands a full cool again, it said. We can use them to nail the lock. Lock it, I said. Precedent name Leaf Bell. Oren moved like a man who had found a staircase hidden in a painting. Drafting precedent statement now, he said, voice flat with concentration. Concise. Durable. Hard to weasel. It must live on the mirror without us. We held the plate while witnesses continued to sign. We took testimony from a cutter pilot who claimed to be tired of singing one note. We listened to a platform manager name the day she bent a clause to help a cousin and slept fine. We let a child hold the microphone and ask if numbers could be kind. I said yes because a lie would have broken something. Kindness is a ledger when you keep it. Commander Saida said quietly, one more cost is coming due. The mirror arrays are developing microfractures in the outer lattice. We can keep them for this session. We will need to pull them apart after. We'll lose our theater for a week. Bill me, I said. Already billed, she said, a smile in her voice like a gear clicking into alignment. Commander Jin said message from the frontier convoy in lane 11. A primacy clerk has begun to copy the caretaker audit petition and post it to 3 side nodes not under ring jurisdiction. She says her nephew is sick. She says she is tired of the word unneighborly. Give her a name, in the ledger, I said, and watched the ring produce a leaf with anonymous courage inside it. People do not need their names shouted. They need their actions to hold. Vellum's aides crowded him with whispers shaped like excuses. He waved them away, not unkindly. He understood that proximity to a doctrine at the moment of its humility can scorch. He did not want to burn any more of his people by making them fetch cold water. I will require protections, he said, turning to me, as if I were the kindest predator available. If I stand in front of a policy and tell it to kneel, the policy will remember my face. I can give you only public, I said. Private is how we got here. He nodded as if I had given him a cloak and then took a breath he would not waste. Clerk, he called. Draft suspension notice for immediate distribution. Phrase it as a caretaker measure for audit integrity. Invoke prudence, not mercy. Put my seal on it. He squared his shoulders a fraction. If I am to lose a doctrine, I will keep my diction. The ring took his seal like a confession, and 12 courts stamped an echo. The cutters rotated their collars to stand by. The amphitheater exhaled as one without agreeing to be a choir. The baker tucked the cloth into her pocket and took the kids home. The maintenance boy stopped drawing shapes and wiped his hand on his vest and grinned like a person who had learned a new form of arithmetic. Precedent statement ready, Orrin said. 2 lines legible and forcible, ready to place. Place it, I said. He spoke into the ring with a cadence that made the words weigh more than their letters. Within the cradle jurisdiction, enforcement collars are suspended, pending independent audit, when public mirror escrow claims exceed 10% of recorded hours. Any gratitude tithe requiring collars for compliance shall be deemed non-gratitude and ineligible for bond backing. The ring did not adorn it. It displayed the lines in honest font and waited for signatures. Vellum signed first, which proves that even doctrines can love a clean sentence. I signed after, which proves that anger can learn courtesy. Salter appended the saint's seal without flourish. 12 courts echoed. 30 more marked review with timelines not favorable to delay. Commander Salter said the saint will need cool within 8 minutes. We can keep the arrays at half for the statement of costs. Costs, I said, and took a breath that had been waiting all morning. We name them. I faced the amphitheater and the mirror ring and every watching room. Our victory today is not free, I said. We will pay. First cost our saint will go to skeleton crew for a week for lattice repairs. We will drift quiet, and that invites fools. Second cost our convoy will reroute around 2 nodes where habit still holds collars by sentiment. We will lose time, and time is bread. I held their gaze like a ledger that wanted affection. Third cost belongs to Procurator Vellum, who will face his own. He has chosen to stand here and not hide. You will be kind. Kindness can be a verdict when you write it with your hands. Vellum blinked twice and looked at the floor as if searching for a dropped word he might yet use. The mirror ring dimmed a fraction and then steadied. The saint sent a soft chime through the spine the note engines play when they ask permission to rest. Saida gave me a look that was both command and plea. We had to end, and we had to end clean. Commander Jin said Frontier Convoy confirms safe passage. The yeast lives. They send you the smell of bread as a file. He smiled despite himself. It's very amateur. Put it on the record, I said. People forget that bread is policy. We adjourned with a bow to the room and a nod to the cutters that felt like a dare. The crowd did not cheer. They signed. They vowed to show up tomorrow for the boring parts. That is how republics survive their theater. The corridors outside smelled of oil and hot dust and the ghost of incense. A kid ran past us and slipped on a patch of polished floor and popped up laughing, as if the world had been returned to an angle he recognized. In the maintenance tunnel, the air had weight, and water dripped at measured intervals into a catchpan. The sound made a metronome of patience. A clerk stood in a doorway and watched us pass and did not speak. She touched her wrist where a collar once lay, and then put her hand down and looked at her fingers as if they belonged to a story she had not expected to get. I wanted to stop and tell her that stories do not belong to us either. They own us when we are good. Back on the bridge, the saint cooled with a sigh that sounded like rain on a ship's skin. Salter withdrew from brilliance into a presence that made the room feel intelligently empty. Saida took off her gloves and looked at her palms with satisfaction and fatigue. Orrin sat finally and let the chair know his weight. You were brutal and precise, I said to him. I tried to be neighborly, he said, which for him meant confession. You were also sharp, Jin added, which for him meant gratitude shaped like teasing. Salter spoke last, almost shy. Commander, I have cataloged 812 new neighbor phrases that map to compliance with dignity. We can teach them to people who will need them when the ring is elsewhere. It paused not for effect, but for tenderness. I believe we are allowed to teach. Teach softly, I said. Count loudly. I put my hands on the console and felt the hum return in the smallest way. We slept in shifts and woke into a different room. The next day we pulled arrays from the saint and laid them out like old bones that deserved oil. The amphitheater hosted committees that were not elegant. The cutters pretended to enjoy holding station. The baker hung a small sign that read, "Closed for inventory," and kept the kids home to count the cups, an activity that teaches as well as any sermon. Vellum dressed without the collar and discovered his throat was shorter than he believed. He did not speak to me. He did not need to. The ring had our names for a season. That is all you can ask of a mirror. When the saint could sing again, we took our place without flourish. We projected no more heat than truth requires. The caretaker audit began on time, which surprised me more than victory. 12 courts kept their hours like surgeons keep theirs. Numbers moved and a doctrine learned to sit before being asked to. There is no hymn sweeter than procedural compliance when you have bled for it. We revisited the River Hab ledger leaf. The filtration units were installed by volunteers who insisted on free tea and no speeches. A platform manager cried in a storage bay and then laughed at herself for crying in a storage bay. The maintenance boy sanded a railing until it glowed, and then drew a square, a circle, and a line on a scrap, and taped it where the light hit right. The baker burned a batch and gave it away as penance. People have their own clergy. In the third week, a counterstroke arrived. A distant Primacy prefect petitioned to revoke the corridor, claiming that mirror escrow constituted hostile accounting and encouraged tax evasion in the guise of neighborliness. He wore a collar in his portrait that matched his curtains. The petition found purchase in 2 courts that liked to dress cruelty in silk. We can't fight on their calendar, Oren said, jaw tight. They will choose a date we cannot afford. Then we keep to ours, I said. We call for witness quorum in those courts using their own mirror subscriptions. We ask for the child's question first. What if they refuse to hear it? Jin asked. They will hear the silence, after Salter said, with that awful, beautiful calm, only machines own. And silence is expensive when a doctrine sells gratitude. We sent our petition in language so simple it made us nervous. We placed 2 leaves on the ring. One read, child's cough. Our added, why? The second read, caretaker audit. Pause, recalculate. We invited testimony. We did not beg. We offered a room with chairs and water and the advice to bring a sweater. We invited their grandparents. We waited. The first court demurred with a phrase that meant we like our rugs undisturbed. The second court ignored us. We did what survivors do when fire does not look up. We knocked again. We used their own bell. We asked their watchers to sign not for us, but to force their courts to admit the world was in session. Signatures arrived like a drizzle that refused to admit it was a storm. A nurse. A clerk. A student who hated numbers and had learned 3 he loved. A cutter pilot willing to admit boredom. A poet who had stopped apologizing for inventory. The bell rang in both courts with a polite tone, the kind that makes you stand without thinking. We filed into their rooms without moving our feet. Mirrors are generous when they are tired of reflecting vanity. The prefect argued elegantly and wrongly. He named anarchists and thieves and soft minds. Oren named granaries and schedules and bones. Vellum did not speak. He sent a short note that said caretaker audits preserve dignity and solvency. The courts leaned toward solvency with the relief of men remembering they have wallets. The corridor held. The mirror escrow matured in leaves that glowed like honest bread. The prefect retired for family reasons. Family reasons cover many kinds of mercy. We finished the audit on a day that smelled like rain and hot metal. Numbers settled with the weariness of a herd finding grass after rock. Collars moved from necks to museum cases in the nicer courts where children would one day point and ask why. I would like to think their guides will explain without lying. I will settle for the guides handing them a leaflet and telling them to bring it home and ask their aunt. We stood in the amphitheater for the last time that season and chose our ending. The cutters had the grace to hold still. The audience had the wisdom to stay seated. We did not make a speech. We made a record. Oren filed the final reconciliation with a signature that shook like a man who had carried too many nouns. Salter sang a single tone up the spine to honor the saint who had forgiven us our heat, because our heat had found a home. Saida patted the mirror arrays with affection, as if machines can learn jealousy. They can. They forgive better than we do. I thought of the maintenance boy's square circle line. I asked him later what it meant. He shrugged and said, "Door wheel road," as if I were slow. He said, "You make the door with numbers and push the wheel with names, and then you walk." I pretended I had always known. He laughed and gave me a scrap with a new drawing on it. This one was a square, a circle, a line, and a small star. I asked him nothing. He had work to do. We left the cradle net under escort made of politeness and unsigned obligations. Vellum did not wave. He had a region to manage and a doctrine to retire with dignity. I sent him a single message that read, "Stewardship is fashionable." He did not reply. He did not need to. The ring had replied for him in 12 courts and 1,000 rooms. On the bridge, the saint hummed a note like a patient dog at your heel. Salter's presence filled the room without making it small. The citrus polish lingered a promise that the next inquiry would smell clean. Jin leaned back and closed his eyes and counted himself to steadiness. Saida checked the matrix seals and smiled at their quiet. Oren wrote the last paragraph of a report that would be unread by the people who needed its courage and indispensable to the people who needed its grammar. I placed my palm on the console and remembered what I had promised the child. Numbers are not kind by themselves. They become kind when you write where they land. We would go to another court and another mirror and another ledger, and we would teach by numbers and remember by ledgers and refuse collars wherever a quorum had hands to sign. We would pay costs. We would sleep in shifts. We would smell bread in files and engine heat in prayers. I opened the channel and let my voice travel where our arrays could not. I spoke to the rooms that had watched and to the rooms that would only hear about this from a tired friend. I kept it brief. I kept it honest. I kept it neighborly. The public ledger entry blinked and then settled to a steady green that looked like breath held and released. We do not win by making graves. We win by making rules that keep children from learning the shape of a bruise as a family story. We do not humiliate. We hum. We do not burn. We bake. Today you watched solvency kneel to dignity because you counted aloud. Tomorrow you will be asked to count again when your hands are full and the room is too warm and someone you love thinks obedience is a kind of love. Count anyway. Hold the mirror. Sign your name. And when they offer you jewelry that tightens, ask them to show you the receipt. Court beacon, cooling to silver. Public ledger stamped precedent collars, suspended. Pending audit confirmed.